This is Sanjeev. No question.
Yeah, my question is to Mr. Dr. Sundar Kamath. Your suggestion of creating ODM from India is fantastic. But right now we don't have ODM ecosystem in India. But we are great into embedded designs today. So can we see one more type of a business model where the EMS companies taking advantage of local design houses in India and jointly then manufacturing and promoting those products to the global, because you are a global company. You know there is a talent availability in this region and there are a lot of design services company. So can we see a business model where you leverage the design ecosystem in India, manufacture in Chennai and supply to the global customers?
Good question.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question, and we are actually doing it. I'm working with some design companies in India. In fact, just to share something else, I mean, back in 2001, I started the first design relationship with one of the companies here and helped them get into medical. So I worked with many design companies. I think part of the issue we have is that we are also trying to do the ODM model using these design companies. But we have to invest. And being in the EMS business, our margins are not great. So I have a lot of discussion with my CEO on how I can get more money to invest in products that may or may not succeed. So there's a risk element to it. But if you partner with an OEM, they come in from the beginning. The OEM, ourselves, the design house, we all work together and then launch the product through that OEM. That's a success. So I'm working on some of those models exactly along those lines. Just wanted to make a comment on the ID side also. I think Iesa should look at this particular aspect, because if you want to become a product nation, the look, feel, all of those things are very important. And in India, there's very few ID houses. I work with at least 3 or 4. I mean, they're all good in their little space, but this has to be spread across the country. Create that concept of ID, user experiences, the whole Apple story, right? But also create the infrastructure for developing those early prototypes. You know, there's a lot of talk about 3D prototyping and so on, but being able to get the right plastics, light vacuum forming, light finish, light coatings on it, those are all things that are important. We actually had to use Chinese prototype houses for some prototypes.
Right.
Because we couldn't get the finish. So I think that's an area where India can invest and excel.
Yeah, like if you go to Shenzhen, there are malls that only help the prototyping of electronics. I went to one mall and there are 10 plastics for different tablets available. You can buy 1 piece to 10 pieces. There was one question at the end. Last line, please.
Yeah. My name is Prakash. My question is addressed.
Can you be a bit louder? It's not very audible here.
Okay. My question is addressed to the gentleman from Delphi. Like, if you see the current trend in automotive electronics, like the presence of electronic component in four-wheelers have increased exponentially. Like nowadays we have safety solutions like ADAS and everything coming up in the mass market as well for the four-wheelers. But recently I was reading an article, in India, every year around 150,000 people die of road accidents, and out of which around 75% are two-wheelers. So I was just wondering that whether are we addressing, there's a huge demand for safety solution of two-wheelers. Are there any applications or technology usage by which we can address this huge demand in the Indian market, customized for developed in India and for this Indian market, for two-wheelers market?
So Mitul, first of all, Mitul represents Johnson Control. He's ex-Delphi. Question is more towards safety systems in the automobile in India. And are you asking specific to two-wheeler or
yes.
It's a general question?
It's specific to two-wheelers.
Okay. I haven't seen an airbag on two-wheeler yet, but if Mitul has any bright ideas, I'll be willing to listen to those.
So I think that particularly two-wheeler market is very conscious in terms of the value. I mean, if you see a very simple thing like a speedometer, which has moved from where you have I think it's a price which is basically driving or keeping the mechanical instrument clusters alive. And it's very interesting when people from various parts of the world come here and look at those mechanical clusters, they actually take them just like a memento to keep it in their offices, because nowhere in the world, except for some areas in China and probably in the Southeast Asia, these are still made, the mechanical instrument. But why we are not seeing a shift is basically because of this reason. But it doesn't mean that the safety systems are not coming on the two-wheeler side. what we are seeing is that there is some drive which is coming from the OEM side. Recently, I think there was an announcement by Hero where they said that they're going to introduce the immobilizer, which is a security system for a bike in some of the top-end bikes. So we will see this coming in the market, and this is where the need for companies like us to create those products for the Indian markets. And this particular set of people who have to help us create those products have to work together to bring that here. So we will see that coming, but I would not say that the traction is very high.
Thank you, Mitul. We are almost over time now. Probably we have time for one last question. Where was that question?
I have a question here.
Okay.
Yeah. So you know what? This is actually very encouraging to hear the way the manufacturing, Indian manufacturing, is actually going great guns. So the one question which I have, and any of the panelists can take it is, I would pay additional bucks, for a product manufactured, say, made in Japan, than made in China. So essentially, one thing is about cost, and other thing is about value. As they say, right? People will come for cost, but stay for value which you add. So, in your opinion, do Indian, overall engineering ecosystem and our own, knowledge base, what kind of value do we add that one day we will be, as respectable as, say, made in Japan?
Okay, so the question to panel is that generally it's seen traditionally in India that made in Japan is higher perceived the value or quality than made in China or elsewhere. Although I would say that those things and value perceptions are changing over time. 5 years ago probably that was true that Japanese TV brands were #1 in the world and in India, but it's no longer the case. The Korean brands are overtaken. And I won't be surprised in 5 years, 10 years from now if Chinese or Indian brands will overtake. But if Dr. Kamath or if any one of you has any comments to add, what would it take for India to go up the value chain in that branding? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's no question that there are perceptions, right? There are different perceptions. Japanese is considered high quality. And in the US today, Chinese products are not at all looked at favorably. There's been a lot of issues. I think there may be a room for India to come up with a higher cost product with very high quality and then move down from there. Because just going after low cost and cheap products can lead to the situation that's happening in China. So I think what I felt this for some time is that when you look at the domestic demand and the kind of products people are buying here, why can't an Indian company have a product designed and we will manufacture in Chennai, or there are other companies who can manufacture to the global standard and launch it in the both the Indian market and abroad, but focus on appearance, look, feel, user experience, quality, and class, rather than just cheap.
Thank you. So we are well over time, 15 minutes over time in fact, so we would like to close the panel now. But before I close, very quickly summarize. While we have all seen and agreed there are challenges to electronic manufacturing in India, at the same time we are seeing some positivity. The sentiment seems to be positive going forward with the right policy intervention and right investments from multinationals and Indian entrepreneurs. I think the manufacturing besides design together can grow in India and overall lead to growth of Esdm sector. Thank you very much fellow panelists, and thank you audience for your intelligent questions.
Before we leave the panel, I would request Mr. Keska to kindly come to the podium and give a mementos to all the panelists. First of all to Mr. Vivek Tyagi, kindly accept a memento as a token of love and affection. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for an extremely thought-provoking panel discussion. In fact, Mr. Satyendra Singh, Head of Manufacturing Operations India, Nokia Siemens Network. Mr. Satyendra, kindly accept. Mr. Mitul Rustagi, Also to Dr. Sundar Kamath, Senior Vice President Technology. Sanvina, thank you, sir. And of course to Mr. Sanjeev Narayan, CMD of SGS Techniques. Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev Keska, for doing the honors, and I would request the panelists to take your positions in front of the podium.